Good, good morning. Welcome from just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Dirk Bruff. I'm very glad to be with you all um, today. Thanks for that very warm introduction, Stacy. I'm glad to be here and glad to interact with you through a rather interesting Zoom setup. So, especially given our topic of focusing on student participation and engagement in the classroom. So, um, I guess a couple of caveats. Actually, let me share my screen here. And let's see. Screen two is the one I want to share. Here we go. All right. Okay. So I'm going to keep going unless someone flags me down and says that I'm not doing something useful. Are we good, Connie? I can see your face. We're all good. Excellent. Um, all right. As Stacy said, I have been working in teaching centers for most of my professional career, and I love this work. I love getting to interact with faculty in lots of different disciplines and think about how teaching and learning plays out in different teaching contexts and exploring how the choices we make as teachers can foster some hopefully really great learning experiences for students. And so um, today we're going to talk about strategies for class participation and student engagement, thinking about those live class sessions, primarily in the classroom, but also in a Zoom session, and thinking about how we can create more lively and engaging environments for our students. Couple of caveats, speaking of lively environments. One is that my family and I are moving, and so there's some chaos happening in the house right now. I'm hoping that won't be too disruptive, but bear with me if something strange happens. The other is that we are talking about class participation, and right now I can't see any of you. And so we're going to try to, when I lead a session like this, I try to model some of the strategies that we can use. And so um, this teaching environment that I find myself in is rather artificial. Hopefully you don't have to teach in this particular modality very often. But I'm going to do my best to try to share some useful ideas and strategies and teaching principles, but also engage you to the best of our ability with the tools that we have here. So, okay, Connie is now showing me the room so I can see everyone wave at me. Thanks. There we are. All right. Yay. Okay. Very glad to be with you today. So let's get started and talk about this stereo metaphor first. I want to show you this archival photo. This is a stereoscope from the 1860s. This is an image of Charles Street Mall, the Boston Common in Boston. I found this a while ago. This is one of those things where this was all the rage there for a brief time in the 1800s, where you would take two photos of the same scene from slightly different perspectives, and if you put those photos in a little viewer and held it up to your eyes, your brain will interpret those different perspectives as depth, right? This is how we experience depth through our visual system, and you can kind of fake it through this type of stereoscope. Two slightly different angles on the same scene, and all of a sudden, our brain starts to interpolate some depth to it. This is the stereoscope I'm used to that I experienced a lot when I was young, the Viewmaster. Same idea. It came with these little round cards that you could slide in, and it would have two images on either side, and you could click the little thing and rotate it and see different pictures. This photo I found on Flickr, and I was very happy because it's actually the exact Viewmaster content that I experienced as a kid. It was from the Batman and Robin TV show. So you may have some experience with this. There are modern techniques that kind of take this even further. I heard a really interesting talk by Giles Spence Morrow when I was at Vanderbilt University a few years ago. He's an archaeologist, and they use a technique called photogrammetry, where they will, what he said was it's really hard to get to some of these sites. You spend most of your time not at the dig site. You are occasionally in the dig site in person. And he said, what we really like to do as archaeologists is kind of sit in the dig site and look around and use our archaeological imagination and kind of imagine what it was like when people were actively living there. And that's hard to do when you're, 2,000 miles away. And so what they've done is they've used some pretty sophisticated technology to take a lot of photos, like a lot of photos of the dig site, and then use some computers to stitch all that together and create a virtual 3D model of the dig site. And so it kind of looks a little bit like this when you're zoomed out. And given how many photos and the high resolution they're dealing with, it gets pretty detailed actually. And so you can virtually kind of zoom around, situate yourself in this virtual environment and simulate that sitting and thinking and imagining piece that he said is so valuable. And so this notion that if we come at something from enough different angles, we're going to start to see new sides of it, new angles, new depth to it, is really the metaphor that I'm playing with today when I say teaching in stereo. Ideally, we are creating classroom environments where our students are part of that process, where whatever we're teaching, whatever topic or skill set that we're teaching, that our students are in a position where they can bring their perspectives and their backgrounds and their experiences and their ideas, right? And their trials and errors, all to that same topic. And when we can bring all of those together, not just, the textbook's perspective or our perspective, but all of our students, hopefully we'll all start to understand the topics of study more deeply. This is the dream, right? It's not always easy. And in fact, I often cite this statistic from a 2015 book by Howard on discussion in the college classroom. He cites some sociologists who did some observational studies of a variety of college classrooms in different disciplines. And they found that just 5 to 8 students will account for 75 to 95% of college classroom discussion, regardless of class size. You've probably experienced this, right? You throw out a question, and it's the same 5 to 8 students who always put their hands up and respond to it. And that's true whether you have 15 students or 200 students. It's hard. It's right. There's a lot of reasons why students don't engage and participate and share their perspectives and their trials and errors with us. Um, and in order to dig into this a little bit more and to have you guys engage with each other, we're going to do a think, pair, share. All right. So here's the structure. I'm going to give you a minute to think about some answers to this question. What are some reasons why students don't participate during class? What have you experienced? What do you conjecture? Then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to turn to a neighbor and share the reasons you brainstormed. Look for some commonalities and differences. If you are joining us virtually, I invite you to go to the chat for that and just be one giant pair. My experience with virtual participants, many of you will hang back and observe, and that's fine. But those of you who want to have that pair interaction, jump into the chat and share some reasons. And then what I'll do is I'll share a poll with you, and I'm going to ask you to report 1 or 2 of your key reasons for non-participation. Let me go ahead and show that poll to you and get it started so you know what to expect. We're going to do a couple of polling questions today. So we're going to use a tool called Mentimeter. Let's see, it should be coming in line. There we go. All right. So you're going to want to go to menti, menti.com, and use this 8-digit code, 46392245. This is how we'll do the share piece. So I'm going to put this back up in a minute when we get to the share time. All right. But that's what to expect when we get to the polls. I'm going to go back to my slides here. There we go. All right. So phase 1 is think. So I've got a clock down here. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. Maybe jot down some answers here. This will be awkward silence. That's okay. Think about this question. What are some reasons why students don't participate during class, starting now? All right, that was a full minute. So now we're going to move to the pair phase. I'll give you a couple of minutes to talk with a neighbor about this and compare notes. Go. Okay, I believe that was 2 minutes. So if you haven't started responding via Menti, now's a good time to jump into that. Again, it's menti.com. And the code is 46392245. I'll give you a couple of minutes to get some more responses in. All right, I'm going to gather us back together. I see lots of responses on the Menti. Also, by the way, I'm from South Carolina. My vowels are a little shaky. I have to think very hard to say mentee. I'm seeing a lot of responses here. Social anxiety, lack of in-person social skills, afraid of being wrong, fear of being judged, disengagement by playing on their devices. Oh, lack of trust in the instructor, right? There's a relationship piece there. Instructors moving too fast for students to process. I'm often guilty of that. This was one of my favorites, the Gen Z stare. I've gotten that in a variety of contexts, right? Distracted, hungry, tired, not confident, uninterested, bored, I saw down there, didn't do the reading, right? There's a whole set of missed the code for the mentee. I like that one as well. That was fun. Um, Lots of options, lots of reasons why students might disengage. This is not This sounds pretty depressing, actually. I do want to show one little tool that I've been playing around with. One of the reasons I'm trying Mentimeter in my polling these days is that they have this little AI magic sparkle that I can press, and it will take all of your responses and attempt to put them into categories, sorting the circles from the squares. And so Menti's little AI saw a few patterns. Um, Comments around anxiety, around shyness, around confidence, around distraction. If you're interested in trying this out, it's kind of nice. You can dip into the categories and see the specific responses that are in there. Um, and if you don't like something's category, you can just kind of throw it somewhere else. Oh, there's a lot of category. I didn't realize there were so many. Belonging, right? Preparation. The pace is too fast, not interested. Fear of judgment. Uncategorized responses. Oh my goodness. Okay. So um, I think it did a pretty good job there of capturing at least the vibe of your collected responses. Yeah, students bring a lot into the classroom. Um, and sometimes it makes it very hard to engage them. And I'm not going to be able to solve all of those problems in an hour today. But I do hope to give you a few ideas and tools and strategies that I think will help mitigate some of them, right? So for students who don't feel as confident or students that maybe take a little bit longer to kind of get ready to share something, um, there are some things that we can do to try to make our classroom environments a little more welcoming and friendly to the kinds of participation that we'd like to have. And in fact, um, uh, this think, pair, share is one of the structures that I often recommend. Instead of just tossing out a question to the class, you do a think, pair, share structure like this so that all the students who need a minute to think have a little quiet time to do so and gather their thoughts. Then they move to a small group environment where they can kind of share in a slightly safer environment and maybe get some feedback and realize, oh, yeah, I'm not crazy for thinking this. And then you come to the share phase. And whether you do that with a poll or class-wide discussion, I find that when you've done the think and the pair, you hear from more students during the share phase. And often they have more developed thoughts, right? This takes a little bit more time, but this a little bit of structure goes a long way, I think, in helping students get ready to engage in a meaningful way. So there's a lot of research on learning, and one of the challenges in getting class participation is that learning is actually hard. And I think students, especially in college, if they haven't figured this out before, they figure it out in college, that this is hard and it takes a lot of effort. And there are kind of better ways and worse ways to go about studying. This is some of the classic research on learning science that, if you space out your study, as opposed to cramming. You get more understanding and memory. If you can interleave topics, that again kind of tickles your brain in a more effective way. Or if you do a lot of retrieval practice where you're testing yourself, right? This is where students sometimes want to like highlight stuff in their textbook, and that's not a super effective study strategy. Much better to have some chance to test themselves. Um, these are desirable difficulties in that they lead to something useful, but it's hard, right? Like to structure your study time, to structure your life this way to do this is challenging. To kind of push your brain in these ways is challenging. What I have found is that not all difficulties are desirable, actually, that students encounter. And here's my little story to help you remember this idea. This is a photo that I took several years ago here in Nashville. I was out on a Saturday morning run. I think I was training for a 5K or a half marathon back when I ran a lot more than I do now. And I was out in this lovely path by the river. I was doing a lot of miles. I was getting the exercise that I needed to as I was training for this race. The problem was the night before, I had watched 3 or 4 episodes of The Walking Dead, the zombie TV show. And so the entire time I was out running, I just imagined seeing zombies behind every tree, right? This was a very stressful run and a very beautiful environment. Um, and that is an undesirable difficulty, right? What happens more often is like I'll be traveling, and I want to go for a run in some city I don't know anything about, and so I have to find like a city park where I can go running. And the worst is when I have to take an Uber to get to the city park so that I can run, right? Like the Uber is not the desirable difficulty. That's just the thing in the way, preventing me from doing the thing that I really want to do. The running is hard, and that's okay. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to tax my body. That's supposed to be hard. The getting to the run is not supposed to be the hard part. And so I think this is a useful lens for thinking about class participation. And there's a teaching principle here. Um, as teachers, we should try to maximize the desirable difficulties for our students. We are creating learning environments that are going to challenge them in useful ways, but we should try to minimize some of the undesirable difficulties. And I think there are often these kind of structures and tools that we use in class that, again, some students find hard to navigate. And if we can remove some of those undesirable difficulties, they'll have more bandwidth to participate in the ways that we want them to. So, what are some strategies? Let's be practical here for a minute, and then I'll pull it back a little bit more and talk about some principles. So, I'm a big fan of in-class polling. Stacy mentioned, I think my first book came out in 2009, and it was all about polling. Back then, we had these little clickers that students would borrow, and they would answer A, B, C, or D, and they would have to aim it at this infrared thing at the front of the room. We have a lot of polling options now. Mentimeter is one that I've found. Poll Everywhere. There's lots that are helpful. This is a polling question that I've often used in my statistics class. I do this at the beginning of our unit on probability, so fairly early in the semester. And this will be like the first thing we do in class one of those days. I'll say to my students, your cousin calls to say she's having twins. Which of the following is more likely? Assume she's not having identical twins. Is it more likely that she's going to have twin boys, twin girls, one boy and one girl, or are all three equally likely? This actually happened to me. And in fact, my cousin was getting IV. So like we knew they weren't identical twins. And so we could make our guesses, right? And so the way that I run this in class is I'll pose this question to my students. It's a little bit like a think, pair, share. I'll give them every student a chance to think about this question, commit to an answer, and use whatever polling tool that we're using to answer A, B, C, or D. And that's usually a pretty quiet phase. And then we'll get some type of bar graph, depending on whatever polling tool that I'm using. And often it looks like this. Usually the two popular answers are C and D, with a couple of votes for A and B somewhere in. So then, to continue the think, pair, share structure, I'll invite my students to pair up, turn to their neighbor, talk the question out, put their heads together. I'll say if you both agree already, you could both be wrong, so talk it out anyway, or maybe find someone who disagrees with you, right, and have that conversation. And I'll give them a couple of minutes to kind of talk in small groups and try to kind of refine their understanding and explain their reasoning to each other. Sometimes they're drawing diagrams to each other. This is always very exciting, right? To hear 75 students burst into chatter about probability. Eventually the chatter goes into other topics, but initially it's about probability. So then I'll ask them to vote again after they've had this chance to kind of talk to their peers. And so usually at this point, we see a little shift in the bar graph. Here, the shift is moving towards the one boy and one girl response. And at this point, I'll ask for the share. I'll ask for some students to share why they answered the way they did. Why did you pick one boy and one girl? Why did you pick all three equally likely? That student who's stuck with their twin boys answer usually wants to talk about it at this phase, so I let them have that space, right? Sometimes I'll ask, why did you change your mind from one to the other? And that's usually interesting because here the idea is to get some of the reasoning out in the classroom space, in the room. And again, because I've structured it this way, I've heard from all students already because they've all voted, right? So there's a kind of minimal participation from everyone. And then I'll start to hear from a bigger set of students during this class-wide discussion. Then for this question, I'm able to actually run a little simulation. So I ask my students, I used to say flip a coin, but no one has coins anymore. So I say, get an ID card out. We're going to run a little simulation of having twins. We're going to make a couple of simplifying assumptions. We're going to assume two sexes here, boys and girls, and we're going to assume that they occur 50-50. In real life, both things are more complicated, but for our modeling, we're going to assume those two things. So take your ID card, assign one side to boy, one side to girl, and then flip it in the air twice and see what you get. And usually I'll run a poll and collect data as well. So we start to see kind of what combinations of twins the students got. And at that point, it's really clear that there's like a 25-25-50 breakdown. One boy and one girl is far more common than the other two options. And it's at that point that I then provide my explanation. And this is not a math class, so I won't go into detail. But the idea is that you kind of have boy, 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 girl, girl, boy, girl, girl. You have four equally likely outcomes. I just put two of them together in the way that I framed the question, right? One boy and one girl. And it taps into this misconception that I find that students and frankly faculty, when I do this in workshops, have, is that when it comes to probability, all things are equally likely. That's kind of a default answer. What I want them to understand is that we actually have to be very careful how we model. What are the assumptions we're making? How are we grouping events together, right? How are we naming things? All of that matters to come out with actually usable probability information. This whole process is 20 minutes of class, sometimes 25 if they really get into it. And it's a lot of class time, but I find that if they don't get this misconception resolved early in this unit on probability, they're toast for the rest of the unit. So I really want to kind of dig this out and unearth it and interrogate it together. And B, the way that I've structured this activity means that it's 20 minutes of like fully engaged students. They're thinking, they're conjecturing, they're predicting, they're talking about it with each other. They're looking at the bar graph and wondering what the right answer is, right? All of this is designed to kind of help them get there. One of the things that I think I appreciated about teaching on Zoom for a year or longer, depending on where you were, during the pandemic was that the Zoom has this little polling tool that's just like right there. And so it's so easy in a virtual environment to just start a poll and run a poll. In a physical classroom, you've got to have some other technology, but again, there's lots of options here. There's a lot you can do with a multiple choice question. And again, when I wrote my 2009 book, that's the only option we had with the technology. So it was all multiple choice questions. But of course, now we have other options like that poll that I ran with you all. Here's another example of a poll type that I think is pretty interesting. This was from Sravanti Kantheti, who teaches anatomy and physiology at Lanier Technical College. And I can't remember if that's South Carolina or North Carolina, but it's somewhere in the Carolinas. This is a clickable image question. So it's a different format. She found this image of a heart and she could load it up to her polling system. She could ask her students, where in the heart would you find the oxygenated blood? And all the students kind of tap on the image wherever they think that's appropriate. And then the system gives her this kind of heat map of where most of the students are tapping, right? And so the reason I want to share this is because this whole section, we're kind of thinking about what are ways that students could participate in class other than using their voice. And so responding to a multiple choice question poll, responding to an open-ended poll like I asked you to do with Menti, clicking on an image, right? These are different ways for students to engage with the material and to show you that they're engaging in some fashion. They have different pros and cons, right? It's not the same as a class discussion, but you can start to hear different perspectives. I like this one. This is from a very different discipline, same question format. This is from some faculty at Cornell University who are teaching a Greek myths course, as classics faculty often do. Here they put in a few lines of text from the Iliad, which was the text that the students were reading, and asked their students to tap on the word, phrase, or line that they found most unexpected. And so I like that this is an open-ended question. You may get surprised by what students respond with in a question like this, but the polling tool makes it easy to analyze, not unlike Menti's new AI tool, right? I can very quickly see where the cluster of responses are, and I can use that to either call on students, right? A lot of you clicked on got his breath back. Let's talk about that. Why did you find that most unexpected? Or one of you said godlike. I'm curious, why might someone find that unexpected, right? You may not want to call on that one student, but you might invite people to conjecture about that response, right? It gives you some tools to work with to get those perspectives from students, and then you can weave that into the class discussion, and maybe, in fact, then hear from a few more students in a bit more in depth. Um, Here's another teaching principle that's at play here. So this is not me. I'm a runner, not a cyclist. I've never done this. I can imagine, though, if I was a mountain biker going down a mountain bike, going down a mountain with my bike, every mountain is a little bit different. I have some basic skills. I have some ways of handling situations, but I always have to make these adjustments in the moment. This is my metaphor for what I like to call agile teaching. The more we know about our students, the more responsive we can be to their learning needs. When I run that poll about the twins and I see those bar graphs, I kind of know what to expect. I've done it enough, but you never really know what you're going to get from students. And so in the moment, have an opportunity really to be responsive to how they're thinking, how they're understanding things, how they're engaging with this, and respond more directly to what they're giving me. Right. And when you do an open-ended polling question, you really don't know what they're going to get. And you get to practice this agile teaching. I actually learned this term from some physics education researchers who contrasted it to what they called ballistic teaching. That's when you launch the lesson plan at the beginning of the hour and nothing can interfere with its trajectory, right? We've all been in classes like that. We've probably taught some classes like that, right? But when you're practicing agile teaching, you are finding ways to hear from your students and then respond to them in the moment. And it can sometimes feel chaotic. It doesn't have to, right? Like over time, you start to realize, okay, these are the like 4 or 5 things that are likely to happen today. And I've kind of got a plan for each of them. So other options, a few more examples here. Another thing that I used a lot during our year of Zoom teaching was what I like to call a ready, set, go question. Sometimes it's called a waterfall question. So this works best in a text chat, but you can do a version of it with a tool like Menti or Poll Everywhere. So in this class, I was teaching a first year seminar, and we were looking at issues of surveillance and privacy and things. And so I would pose a question in the chat, and then I would say, okay, everyone type your response, but don't hit enter until I say go. So it kind of looks like this while people are typing. And then usually I ask them to give me a thumbs up or an emoji or something to let me know that they're ready. And then I'll say go, and then all of the answers appear at once, right? This is such a beautiful, simple structure that allows you to hear from far more students than you would hear in a kind of verbal classroom discussion, right? Um, Everyone has a chance to think about something, so it has that kind of think phase of the think, pair, share. But there's kind of enough airspace for everyone to put something in. Now, it takes a little processing, right? If I don't have AI to help me analyze this, I'm going to read through these responses. It'll take me a minute, but that's maybe great, right? Actually, we can all read through those responses. Take a minute or two, read through your peers' responses, think of someone you'd like to hear more from, right? And again, you can structure a verbal discussion based on this, but you started it off with this foundation of hearing from hopefully all students. This works best if you have 15 or 20 students or fewer. If you have 50 or 100, it's a little hard to manage. But even then, you could imagine having kind of phases. So like, if you split your class into 4 different groups, for this question, we'll hear from group 1 from everyone. And the next question, we'll ask group 2 to respond, right? So you can still use this structure even in larger classes. And as I said, if you've got a little more technology, you might be able to kind of cluster those. I'm still experimenting with this AI clustering bit. I find that it's like 85, 90% correct. Often I'll find questions that are or responses that are miscategorized. So I think this technology is still a little bit shaky, but it's certainly provocative. It certainly makes me think about how I might use open-ended questions more in larger class sizes. And while we're on the topic of AI, this is not a talk on AI, but I feel like we all have to kind of wrap our brains around it in most aspects of our teaching. Here's another kind of engagement that is kind of probably an out-of-class engagement, but you could use this in class as well. I saw a really great video interview with Alessandra Sarcona, who teaches nutrition at Westchester University in Pennsylvania. And she wrote a prompt that her students could use to give to their favorite chatbot, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, whatever. And what the prompt would do is it would direct the chatbot to act like a patient in a nutrition consulting setting. So she wanted her students to practice certain types of consulting around nutrition and diet with patients. And so she wrote a prompt that would make the bot act like a certain kind of patient and give certain kinds of feedback so students could do this kind of practice consulting. Now, it's a text consulting, it's not live consulting, right? It's very much an approximation to the real thing. But I like this idea that every student would have a chance to engage in this simulation. Every student's simulation is a little bit different because of the way chatbots work. You never get the same thing twice, right? And so it gives them all a chance to practice these skills. And then the professor can then do some kind of debriefing afterwards with students, have them reflect on the process, have them talk about what worked, what didn't, that kind of thing. And all of these are examples of what I like to say is that the medium matters. I don't know that this is the best visual metaphor. I just enjoy this photo of a phone booth I took at, I think this was Petrified National Forest a few years ago. There was just this phone booth there, like it was 1987 or something. Um, but the medium matters when it comes to participation. When we give students choices in how they engage, it can help more students participate. So it's not just their voice, but they can respond via a poll or a tap on an image or a text chat, right? All of these things are they're removing some of those difficulties, those undesirable difficulties that students might experience. And if you taught on Zoom in 2020, you probably realize this. Like over in the chat world, there were different students participating than you would have heard otherwise. And that's pretty exciting. And we can use that to our advantage. Okay, so here's our next little activity. We're going to do a small group discussion here. And again, I'll encourage our virtual folks to kind of be their own small group, even though there's like 30 of them in there. At your tables or in the virtual chat, share some ways that you might vary the medium for class participation. How might you play with this idea of changing up the medium for your class participation? Think about strategies you've used or seen used, as well as strategies that you'd like to try. And then have someone in your group take notes on this Google Doc. So if you go to tinyurl.com, I'm going to put this in the chat for the virtual folks, tinyurl.com/bruff, that's my name, and then it's today's date, 081925. That should take you to a Google Sheet that I will show you right now. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Let me go find my web browser here. So yeah, it should look a little bit like this. And I see all the anonymous animals at the top. So that's where you're headed. I'm going to put the URL back on the screen here while you get going. Tackle round one here. This is the round one question. So if you would put your group members' names on the left, and then have someone in your group take a few notes in this round one column. And I will give you a few minutes to do that starting now. All right, I'm going to break up all the fun here and call time. Thank you for jumping in on that. I'll make a few points here. First of all, some really great responses I saw on the Google Sheet. You guys generated lots of different strategies very quickly. Right, an ongoing chat box, question area in Blackboard, right? A kind of asynchronous way for students to chip in can work really well. Oh, the last group mentioned shifting from tech to analog, actually, which is something that was raised in the text chat for our Zoom session, was big sticky notes, right, with Sharpies or whiteboards, right? These are other modalities that I think can kind of help you start to see different things from different students. Ian mentioned in the chat also that like starting a class with one of these activities can be super helpful because it breaks the ice and warms people up for more discussions as you go. Um, I'll also point out that one of the things I'm doing right now, that I again started doing during Zoom, but now I do regularly, is to have a kind of Google Sheet or some collaborative document for group work. There's a lot of advantages to this. One, in your small groups, maybe you don't feel very chatty, but you don't mind taking notes, and that gives you a way to engage with the process. From my perspective, though, it gives me a lot of window into what's happening at those small group discussions. Again, this works if you're in Zoom and you've got breakout rooms, or you're in a physical classroom and you've got small groups around tables. I get some insight into what's happening in those conversations. I also get some pacing information. I could tell like how much progress y'all were making, and I could decide kind of when it's time to move on. Um, so again, a lot of these changes of medium are not only good for helping students engage in different ways, but they make some of that student learning visible to you so that you can practice some of that agile teaching. Okay, we've talked about medium. I want to talk about another big principle here in our time together. And I'm going to use another visual metaphor here. This is an image I found years ago on Flickr of a hat stand in Istanbul, Turkey. So these are all hats for sale, and I think they're beautiful. There are lots of different colors. And in this metaphor, hats are going to represent students. So when I just walk into my classroom and toss out a question without a think, pair, share or something, some kind of structure to it, I might hear from this student over here. I might hear from this student over here. I might hear from this student over here, right? It's the 5 to 8 students that are probably going to do most of the talking, right? The thing is, though, what do you notice about those hats that I've circled? They're all purple. And this is also part of the challenge that we have is often when we do invite students to participate in particular ways, we hear from not only is it the same students, but they're often of a type, right? They are the majors and not the non-majors. They're the women and not the men, right? There's lots of reasons why some students will participate and some don't. But if we're really going to tap into this teaching in stereo piece, we've got to figure out a way to get kind of lots of different perspectives in the mix. And so I call this teaching principle learning communities. These are structured ways for students to learn from and with each other can enhance the student learning experience for all students. And so here's a classic structure that I find is a little challenging to implement, but it's got some big ideas in it that are important. This is the jigsaw approach, where you have 2 rounds of group work. In round 1, you put students together and you give each group a different thing to do, like a different reading to dig into together. And then in round 2, you mix up those groups so that now the new groups have, each new group has a representative of each of the original groups, and you give them some new task where they have to bring those first group perspectives to bear to this new problem, right? So if you gave them all a different reading in the first round, you might have them do something with those readings in that second round. And one of the reasons I love this, and it speaks to some of the concerns that y'all mentioned earlier about why students don't speak up, is that if I'm a group 3 person, right, I have a chance to get some ideas from my peers to kind of dig into the group 3 topic a little bit through my group work. So I'm ready for round 2. And in round 2, I'm the group 3 person. I'm the one who's responsible for sharing that set of perspectives with the new group, right? I have a very particular role. I don't have to do any and all discussion. I have to do this one thing, right? And I've had a chance to kind of prepare for it through the first round. And so my presence, my perspective is very important in that second round, because I'm the one representative from that group, but I'm also ready, hopefully, to participate in a useful way. One variation of this that I've used successfully, and I've heard a lot of faculty really rave, is structured reading groups. So in this case, you give students the same reading, but you give them different roles when they're doing their reading. So this is a screenshot. I did this. I was reading a book, this novel, Little Brother, with my seminar students. We used a tool called Perusall. There are other tools to do some collaborative annotation on the document. This book was actually available as a Creative Commons licensed text, so I could load the whole thing up and have my students read it online and annotate it together. So they would find a section that was interesting to them, and then they would highlight it and add a comment in the margin, and they could see each other's comments. So it was a social collaborative annotation of the text. But to help this work really well, I gave my students different roles. So we had 4 groups in the class. Some students were the passage masters. Their job was to identify key quotes in the text that we needed to talk about. So the annotation was simple. They would highlight the thing that they thought was important, and they would write about why they thought it was worth attention. There were the creative connectors. Their job was to make connections with other things we had studied or other things outside of the class. And again, that simplified their annotation role. Find the thing that makes the connection and then document the connection that you see there in the text. Then there were the devil's advocates. Their job was to argue with points of view presented in the text. And then there were the big questioners. Their task was to try to kind of take something in the text and kind of blow it up into a bigger, harder question that we might tackle later on in the final essays in the class, that kind of thing. And what I loved about this was that it made the reading and annotation process simpler for all my students. They didn't have to respond in any and all ways. They had one particular way to think about how they're going to respond. They could practice that cognitive move, right? And it meant that the discussion phase, whether it was the sidebar in the annotation or when we got to class, they all had different things to bring, right? So you could do a jigsaw kind of thing with this so that when you have them come in class to talk about the thing that they all looked at outside of class, they all have a different perspective to bring. And it's kind of an artificial perspective, right? We're not depending on students to kind of come with a variety of perspectives or experiences they want to share. You're directing them to make one particular kind of cognitive move that's relevant to your course, right? And then to practice that in a small group setting so that they have a kind of a role to play. I think it's a really powerful structure. I would encourage you to think about what the cognitive moves are that are relevant for your course, right? They may not be the same set. These are nice ones, right? But if you're having them engage in different types of material, you may want them to make different kind of cognitive moves. It's a way to think about group roles. It's not like note taker and timekeeper, which are fine roles to have, right? But they're actually giving students a chance to practice particular skills in your course. And so you can name those skills and have them practice that. Um, and the other part is you probably want to rotate group assignments over time, right? So they're not always the devil's advocate, but they get a chance to practice the other ones as well. This gets at another big concept, and that's of interdependence. This is actually a photo I took of my mom's house when it was being built, and I just thought all these things are hopefully supporting each other in some useful way. If we can design tasks that require students to interact with and learn from each other, that can help create this interdependence where the students kind of can't do the task without each other. And that may be artificial. It could be a jigsaw, a structured reading group where it's kind of artificially, we need everyone to participate. But that's going to do a lot to provide a structure to make it easier for students to participate, but also some motivation for doing so. So a few other quick examples. I'm a big fan of a card sorting activity. And this is a screenshot because I often have to do it virtually, but it works with physical cards as well. I'll do this sometimes at the start of my workshops with faculty to kind of demonstrate small group activities. So in this case, I give everyone a set of superheroes to look at. So we've got Batman, we've got Iron Man, we've got Black Panther, we've got Storm, we've got Superman. If you were using this in your class, it would be relevant to your class, right? Unless you teach superheroes, in which case you can do it like this. But pick, 7 or 9 examples of something that are relevant to your teaching. And then I'll have my participants work in small groups to put these in groups of their choosing. They get to decide how to sort these into groups using whatever features of the objects that they want to. And so often in this activity, I'll see, the superheroes who fly and the superheroes who don't, or the superheroes with capes and the ones who don't have capes, or we'll put the boys on one side and the girls on the other side, or the X-Men here and the Avengers here and the Justice League here, right? There's lots of different ways to categorize these particular objects of study and other objects as well. And this is actually a highly structured activity. So I have folks do this in small groups, and then they'll show, usually through some digital tool, they'll show their groupings, and then we'll ask all the other groups in the room to try to reverse engineer why did you group them the way that they did, right? And so this one, actually, I did this with a group of seminary faculty once, and they did a power analysis of the superheroes, but not a superpower analysis, but like real world hierarchical power, because that's how they think. So on the left, we have Batman and Iron Man, who are the billionaires. And in the middle, we have Thor, Black Panther, and Wonder Woman, who are the royalty. And then on the right, we have the aliens and the outsiders, which I thought was a really fun way to unpack this. This struct is a very structured activity. It's designed to surface your students' perspectives on the things that you're studying, right? Whether that's the classic example is from biology, where there are different types of problems that you give them, like test problems, and students have to classify the problems based on whatever features they see, right? Surface level features or deep features. But it's a great way to get students kind of bringing their own perspective on whatever the objects of study are, but also thinking about how other people see these things as well and what features they notice that may be more or less relevant to a particular situation. I'm also a big fan of what I like to call an escalating round robin. We didn't have this is a complicated one to pull off, but the idea is that you give students. So I like to structure this with a Google Sheet. So you're going to put students in different groups. And ideally, each group has a different kind of problem to work on or brainstorming task. And you give them a few minutes to come up with as many ideas as they can with their problem. And then you have them all rotate one to the next task or topic. Now they're coming at this topic. The first group has already put some stuff there on the Google Sheet or maybe on a big sticky note or on a whiteboard. Their job is to read what was put there by the first group and add something interesting or useful to it. And then you rotate again. So now my group's coming to this topic. We're the third group to approach this topic. We're going to have to start working even harder to come up with different ideas and perspectives. Um, so they get kind of at each round, there's more reading and less new ideas. But it's a really great way to generate a ton of really structured participation with students. And then there's the peer instruction. This is a much simpler strategy. You can do this in pretty much every class period. This is how I recommend people think about multiple choice polling questions, right? My twins question was kind of this: pose the question, have the students answer independently, look at the results. Ideally, you're in that Goldilocks zone where the students are split among a couple of answer choices, and then you do the peer discussion and go from there. But if not, if most of them get it right or most of them get it wrong, you can kind of respond in the moment in that way too. It's a think, pair, share, right? With a little bit of extra stuff thrown in. But all of these structures really matter. When students, so you guys named a lot of reasons students don't participate in class, and often they just don't know how. They don't know what they're supposed to do, or they're not quite ready yet to participate, or they have some social anxiety and the full class participation is a little bit much for them, or they're afraid of looking dumb in front of you, and so they're not going to say it to you, but they might say it to a peer, right? Again, there's no kind of, gold star solution to this, but when you build some structure into your class, you're going to start to hear from more students because they have different ways to participate, but you're removing some of that undesirable difficulty, right? When you throw the question out and students can respond any way they want, for some students, that's too many choices. They don't know what they're supposed to do. But when they know they're the passage master and their job in the small groups is to bring the key quotes to the discussion, now they know what they're supposed to be doing, right? And it gives them an avenue and a structure to participate more fully. Okay, so I'm going to take you back to your small groups and that Google Doc that I shared with you. But now I want you to move to that other column. So let me pull that back up here. Now I want you to talk about structures. What are some ideas you have for structuring class participation? How would you adapt something I shared, or are there other structures that you like to use to create this type of environment in class? So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to talk about that and write some answers down in the Google Sheet. Go. Okay, I'm going to break up the fun again. Thanks for jumping in. I will say, especially since I'm not in the room with y'all, to be able to see some of the responses on the Google Doc, it's very helpful as a teacher in this mode to have a sense of what you guys are talking about. Yeah, I love the Will and Jeff talked about different ways of grouping students, right? And having a little fun with that, but also maybe thinking strategically about how to group students so that they can learn a little bit more from each other. Oh, wow. Okay, that group just pasted a lot. Someone hit enter. That's great. Lots of structures, right? Lots of different ways that we can approach this. I also think it can be important to vary your structure, right? Any of these can get a little old if you do it the same way every time. I'm going to share one more interesting idea. This is less about structure and more about variants. This is a photo that was taken of me when I was doing an event last year, I think at somewhere in the SUNY system. I think I was giving a talk. We did what I have now call a snowball fight. So I almost had you guys do this today, but it's a little hard to facilitate from a distance. The idea is that you would ask everyone a question, and everyone writes down their answer to the question on a scrap of paper, and then they wad up that scrap of paper, and when you say go, they throw it across the room. And now there's all these ideas kind of traveling. It's very physical, it's very analog, it's very fun. I wouldn't do this every class period, right? But every now and then it's a really exciting way. And the idea is that everyone would then kind of pick up a snowball that they got from someone else and they would read it out loud. And you would tell them in advance, this is what you're going to do, so that now I don't even have to verbalize my own opinions, right? I'm going to put it on a sheet of paper and throw it somewhere. And maybe someone else will verbalize it out with the whole class. That can be a lot of fun. Every now and then I'll do a choral response question too, where I put up some question on the screen and I have everyone shout their answer at the same time. It's chaotic. I can't understand what people are saying, but it kind of brings a nice energy and makes it easy for people to participate because they know no one can really tell what they're saying. So lots of strategies. I wanted to leave time for, Connie says I can go over by a couple of minutes. So I was going to see if there were maybe one or two burning questions that folks would like to ask. I think we have some microphones that are available for this. I'm curious if there's a question or two that I can address in the time remaining that would be helpful.
Derek, I'll kick us off. So if you've never taught this way before, if you've been mostly comfortable with lecture and or not as much student participation, is there just a way that you would suggest someone starting? Like how can they sort of put their toe in the water on this?
I would start with a think, pair, share. I think it's a pretty basic, simple structure. Think about like plan it, right? So you've got maybe a 50-minute class period. I like to start with the think, pair, share because it sets a nice tone for engagement. But if you're just dipping your toe, maybe think kind of at the midway point in class, how could I ask students to apply something that we just went over in lecture? Give them, the question needs to be kind of interesting enough for students to talk about it, right? It doesn't have to be super hard, but it needs to have, some different possible answers, right? Even if some of them are wrong. And so think about how you could build in just, uh, 4 minutes in the middle, at one point in the middle of your class where students have 30 seconds to think and a minute to talk with a peer, and then you call in a few folks to share, right? That would be a nice way to kind of work into this. If you are comfortable with technology, I think a good polling question can function that way, thinking about like what's one polling, multiple choice polling question you could ask. I also like the multiple choice because you are framing the responses. So if you're unsure how to respond in the moment, you can think in advance. These are the four choices. If most students pick B, here's what I'll do. If most students pick C, here's what I'll do, right? You can plan a lot better when it's controlled in that environment. I find that some of the hesitation from faculty is like, gosh, I don't know what's going to happen today, and I don't feel prepared to think on my feet to handle all of that chaos. And that's fine, right? You can use some simple structures to keep it fairly controlled, but still provide a kind of a few alternatives for students for participating in class. It's a very good question. Thank you. So Evelyn asks, do you have suggestions for fun ways to randomly assign groups on the fly? I have a problem with all of my students talking to their neighbors and friends so they don't get other perspectives and think pair shares. Yes. So you're battling some social inertia here, right? It's very easy for students to sit in the same place every class period and talk to the same people all the time. And so I wouldn't try to fight that every class period, right? You want to give them kind of a relaxed place where they know they can talk. But to be intentional about maybe changing that up occasionally, right? And so, I've had faculty, part of this is getting them to stand up and move around a little bit, right? So you could play a kind of four corners game where you give four different possible responses, and students who have that response need to go to a different corner of the room, right, to move them up a little bit. Um, Jigsaw is a great way to kind of mix things up where like there's a reason they have to get up and move because there's a second grouping that is like intentionally different. Um, in terms of doing the assignments, it all kind of depends on your teaching context, but I tend to lean into some version of playing cards where I can kind of randomize things and this time look at the color of your card or the suit on the card or the number of your card. Um, there, yeah. That's all that's coming off the top of my head. I'm sure there's lots of other ideas out there, but I would say that the point is to think like you are asked, there's a social ask to get people to move forward, move from their usual seats. So make it make sense for them as like why you would want them to get out of their seat and talk to someone new. I mean, you could say like, here's a polling question, and you try to design it so that it's like a pretty even split. And then you say to students, okay, find someone in the room who has a different answer to this polling question than you. Get up and move around until you find someone, right? That might be a way to kind of mix it up a little bit more. Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you for the excellent talk, Derek. This is Carrie Ann Platt. I'm Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs here at NDSU, and I teach courses in communication, 60 to 70 students. My question for you is how directive to be in regard to technology use? Because I find that there's lots of great stuff out there with Poll Everywhere, Mentimeter, but the tricky part is that a lot of this relies on students participating in conversation with each other afterwards. And there's always a danger when you get your phone out or your computer to complete the poll that whatever is on that device takes your attention away from the classroom
Right.
environment.
Right.
So how do you approach trying to gain these multiple benefits and making sure that people are present with one another in the classroom?
Yeah, a great question. I think I tend to lean into kind of two strategies. One is to be really intentional verbally with your students to say, now is the time to get your phone out. Now is the time to get your laptop out. We're going to do this thing together online. Then we're going to put our phone away. Then we're going to close our lids, right? So back in the day, it was lids up, lids down time. It's harder with phones, right? Or watches, right? They're like it's so it's not a foolproof strategy, but if you can be directive with how you want students to spend their time and kind of acknowledge now it's a great time to get your phone out. Now it's a great time to put it away. We're going to try to talk to each other. The other thing I would pair that with is some earlier discussion in the semester about setting some norms and expectations for how we engage with each other in class. Um, I know a lot of faculty who will have that conversation with their students. And on the first day of class or the second day, they'll kind of have a discussion where they collaboratively set some ground rules for how they interact during class. And most of the time, students will land at the same set of ground rules that you would want them to land at. Maybe not always, but usually they want to make class time worth their time being there, right? And they know that if someone else is next to them, watching sports on their phone when they're trying to pay attention, it's not super helpful. And so I would try to set some norms and some ground rules in class, maybe collaboratively with the students so that they have a little bit more ownership over that. That tends to be a little more self-enforcing when they do that. Um, and part of it is saying, yeah, learning is hard. It's going to be hard to like put our phones away and talk to each other occasionally, but we're not going to do it, 50 minutes every class period, but we are going to do it some, and we need to practice these skills. And one way we practice these skills that we're learning is through verbal conversation, right? And that means we have to like actually attend and focus. There's a lot of research on this kind of stuff too. Some faculty like to share some of that research with students up front. That can sometimes be helpful. But a lot of it is kind of trying to establish that set of expectations for how we learn and how we engage.
All right. Well, Derek, this has been great. And we just want to thank you so much for joining us today. Can we thank Derek together for the good ideas?
Thanks so much for having me. This has
Oh,
been
yeah.
great. I'll give you one QR code. I do have a podcast and newsletter, so if you'd like to subscribe, you can follow that QR code and find more information and tracking me down. But yeah, thanks for having me today. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for participating.